Hello, I'm Mark, and welcome back to part 3 of my Unreal Engine tutorial on how to manage your sound mix and sound class settings within your Unreal Engine games. Let's do a quick little recap of what we did in part 1 and part 2. So in part 1, we went ahead and defined our sound classes as well as our sound mix class. And within the sound mix, we went and added our sound classes right there and set our defaults. And then once we did that, we then went ahead and came under Edit, Project Settings, and then Audio, and made that sound mix our game's default. And then we just tested it out a little bit to make sure everything still works. Then in part 2, we broke open Visual Studio, and we went ahead and created our sound mix override system. So to do that, we went and defined what a sound mix override is going to look like, and that's what we did right there. And since we want to pull this from a data table, we went ahead and defined what that table structure is then going to look like, sound mix override row. And then finally, since I want to also have the ability to have our users eventually save their volume settings, we went ahead and created the save sound volumes structure as well. And then, of course, finally, the most important part was creating our sound mix override component, which will handle all of these sound mix overrides, sound mixes overrides, and sound mix class overrides for our game. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's move on to part 3. So in part 3, we're just going to go ahead and integrate all of that into our game instance and as well as into our system user widget classes that we previously created when we were doing the music system component. So let's get started on that. So first off, we're going to come into our game instance. So let's go ahead and we're just going to go ahead and add our sound mix override. So I'm just going to go bring this over. Going to paste that down there. And of course, like anything, when we add something, we're going to also need to make sure that we have our headers. I'm going to put a little space between the header and the generate. And I could use the include, and then we want there we are. And that, okay, that satisfies that. So again, what we have here is we have our sound mix override component that we created over here. And we're going to make this edit anywhere, blueprint, read only, and we're going to put this under systems and we're going to put this under audio. So again, keeping our category structure so it's a lot easier for us to find it when we blueprint this. So I'm just going to hit save. Then we're going to go ahead and add two public, and that's added to our protected section. So under public section, we're going to create our getter just like we did for the music system so that we can get access to that component since it's under the public section. So I'm just going to do that. Again, this is a blueprint pure, forced in line, since it's just a simple getter. And we can make sure that it's constant. That way we can only get a reference to the pointer. Alrighty. So once that is done, we also, I'm just going to, I'm going to future-proof this a little bit. So we won't be doing much with this public function here, the init map sound mix override function, until we get to part 4, which will be sound systems. But while we're here, let's go ahead and add this so that we don't have to come back in part 4 to add this function and then recompile again. So I'm just going to go show fixes. All right, so now that we've got the definition done in our game instance, now let's go ahead and add the implementation. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to come up to our all systems attached, and we'll go ahead and add this function here. And so one of the things that I like to do is I like to make sure, especially when working with loosely coupled components that can be brought in through blueprints, I want to make sure that those components are attached. So that's why I created this little function called all systems attached. And from there we'll just go ahead, just like I did for the music system, we'll do the same thing for the sound mix override. If it's null, if any of these are null, we'll return false. Otherwise, if we're all good, if everything's attached, then we'll return true. So then next we have the game instance initializer, and again we'll go ahead and add our component initializer, and we'll do that again under the, just like we did for music system init, we'll do the same thing for SoundMix init. And again, we want to make sure that first these things are attached, otherwise if we try and run this on a null pointer, the game will crash, the engine will crash. And then finally we have our little function here that we've done so that we can interact with this from a map when we're ready to do that. So to do that, we're just going to go ahead and add a check. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that whatever name override ID that comes through here, right, if it's not, as long as it's not none, we'll go ahead and execute. If it is none, i.e. we haven't defined it, then we'll exit out and we won't run the function. And then we'll go ahead and again make sure that we everything is attached in the blueprint first, and then if it is attached, then we can run the SoundMix override update SoundMix override, and then we're going to pass in the volumes, and this would be the save volumes if this was coming from a save system, and then this would be the ID of the SoundMix override that we wish to change using these volumes. And that's it for the core music game instance component. So next, let's go over to our system user widget. Again, we created this when we were doing the music system, and this is just a nice way that I like to do when I'm pulling systems out of this from the game instance. I like to create just a little class which inherits from user widget, which will set all of this stuff up for me so it's ready to use, and I don't have to do that in the blueprint itself. So again, we're just going to come down, and I'm going to go ahead and grab. So we've got our core mix override. Let's go ahead and make sure that we've got our include. There we are. So there's our override, there's our include. Everything should be happy. And then the only other thing we need to do is on the since we're overriding the native on initialization, when this class first initializes, we want to make sure that we set that pointer. So to do that, we're just going to go here, and I'll say go to definition, which brings us over to the CCP file. Here we are, we have the native initialized, and real easy. We're just going to go ahead and say SoundMix override, go ahead, go into the game instance. As long as the game instance, as long as this is fine, we get the pointer here, we can then go ahead and go get the pointer to our SoundMix override class. And that's it. And that's all we need to be doing for C++. So let's move back to the editor and start working on our blueprints. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and compile. Let this run. All right, we've got a good compile. So next, we're just going to come up to the content drawer. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and define our sound mix table. So we're going to come under audio, sound mixes. I'm just going to right click and let's go to, so data tables are under miscellaneous. And here is our data table. And then from here, in order to create our data table, we're just going to go down to the drop down. We're going to come to sound mix override row, select that, and hit OK. And Unreal Editor will go ahead and create that data table for us. So now let's go ahead and give this a name. So I'm just going to go ahead and give it a prefix of audio. And this is just how I like to prefix and name my data table structures within Unreal. And we'll call this sound mix overrides. So now that we have that, I'm just going to hit save real quick. Get my thing back. Hit save. And that's now created us a table. So within the table, we're going to just go ahead and create 2 records. So in order to add a record to your table, you just come up here, go to add, there's the default. It's called new row. I'm going to change this to our default list ID. So that's our ID. So when we go into the table, we're finding the row by the row ID, which is, for this one, it's going to be default list. And then from within here, we can go ahead and set this up. So we've got a description. We can just go ahead and say call this default settings. Find our sound mix. So I've got sound mix main here. And then let's go ahead and add our classes. So since this is an array, we just need to do that. I'll just open both of these up real quick. And so the first one I'm going to do is music. So we'll set the enum to music. And again, this save volume key will work. This is how our save system was going to then map the volumes when we get there to the sound class without having to do nested loops. So let's go ahead and find our sound mix music class. We'll set that. And let's go ahead and set some other defaults. So I'm just going to set this to 0.1, really bring the volume down. And you know what, I'm going to set the pitch to, we'll set the pitch to, we'll keep the pitch for 1 for now. And then the volume here, let's just make this 0.1. So when this, and we'll make this is our effects. So let's set the effects. Let's go find the sound effects class. So that's 0.1. We'll keep the pitch at that. We'll keep all that same. All right, and so that's our first override, and so that's just getting us back to some defaults. But I've kind of changed them a little bit from what the actual default in the sound mix is, so we can get a feel for that. So let's go ahead and create a second row, and I'm going to call this map level, but you can call it whatever you want. I'm going to hit save. Okay, we'll call this sound, the map level overrides. Select our sound mix. So this is the sound mix that we want to change the sound classes on, or this is the sound mix that we want to use when calling this, and then we're going to add the classes that we also want to override as well. So we can just open this up. Now we'll just set that one to music. I'm just going to go ahead and set this one to effects, and then we'll go find the classes just like we did in the last one. There's the music class, and there is the, where is it? There's the effects class. And then for this one, let's just change these values a little bit so that we can get some change. So this one we said was 1. We're going to set this to 5. I'm going to bring up the pitch to 2. Why not? And then let's go ahead and set this volume from that to 1. So we'll have some loud explosions. And let's really make this pitchy by setting that up to 8. All right. And you know what? If there's a fade in time, if it starts to want to replay, we can set this to 2 if we wanted to. Alrighty. And that's it for the table. So we have our 2 overrides. We have got our default, and then we've got our main level maps. So I'm just going to go ahead and save that. So next, let's go ahead into our content drawer, and let's go ahead and find our game instance. So here we are. We created this when we again did the music component. So now we have our sound mix override component. So let's go ahead and select that. So, and then once it's selected, we can go ahead and open this up. Default list is default list. I'm just going to make sure that this and this are the same. Just makes things a little bit easier. And now that we've got our default list here, I'm just going to keep debugging off. And we'll go ahead and find, there's our sound mix table. So now everything is hooked up within the blueprint. And we can now go ahead and we can go ahead and close this for now, I think. So now we've got everything hooked up. We want to test this. So in order to test this, I'm going to go ahead and create a little override trigger, just like we did for the sound effect. So I'm just going to come in here. Let's go ahead and go to third person characters, blueprints. So, and let's go to blueprint class. I'm going to create an actor. Call it BP. Call it BP Sound Mix Trigger. And then we'll just open this one up. So let's go ahead and just create a simple little trigger that whenever our character just moves into it, it will just go ahead and switch the overrides. All right, so to do that, I'm going to come in. I'm going to go and click on the default scene component. I'm going to go ahead and let's add a cube so we know where this trigger is. And let's go ahead and scale this cube. So to since I want to scale this across all 4 axes, I'm just going to go and hit the little lock button. I'm going to set this to 0.4. That will bring the cube down to something that I like. And then after that, let's go ahead and add a collision box. So I'm going to say add. And there's our collision box. And with the collision box, I'm going to go ahead and change this. So I'm going to click unscale. I'm going to set this to 1 for our height on the z-axis. And then I'm going to set this to 20 on the x and 20 on the y. That gives us a nice area to walk into. All right, so now that that is done, let's go over to the event graph and wire this all up. So we don't need anything for begin play, so I'm just going to take the begin play out, and I'm also going to take the event tick out as well. So to wire this up, let's first get the game instance. So let's get the game instance. So this will get our game instance, and then we need to cast that game instance. I'm just going to go ahead and just cast this to the blueprints. And there it is, BP My Game Instance. So we'll just go ahead and cast it. Just make it look nice and neat. And then off the, once we got the, if we have a good cast, then I'm going to say get sound class. There's the function. I prefer to pull the function. In blueprints, I know you could probably just go ahead and reference it directly, but in case there's any additional things that need to happen on the get, it can happen throughout the function. So let's just call the function, and then from here we just need to then call, let's just call the update sound mix override directly and just hook that in. So now, in order for this to work, we need to make sure first we have an ID, and we don't need to do anything with volumes. So if we just leave this blank, it'll just tell it to use the table. But since I don't want to create, I just want to have one of these defined, but I'm going to put multiple instances within the map. Let's go ahead and create a variable, and so that we can set the ID once we put it into the map. So to do that, I'm just going to go under variables here and go click. And we'll just call this override ID, and we will set this to a name, which is a literal. Hit save, and then in order to make sure that we can change this once we drag and drop it into the blueprint, I'm going to say instance editable, and then I'm also going to add expose on spawn as well. So I can hit that, save. And when we're looking for it, it'll be under the default category. I'm just not going to go ahead and create since it's only one variable. And we can leave this ID as none for now. So that's all that we need. Oh, and we better just go ahead and just get that variable and then just hook that in right here on the blueprint. So hit compile, save, make sure everything looks good. All right. So let's go ahead and add this little trigger into the map. So I'm just going to go close, come up to the content drawer, and we'll just put our first trigger there. Why not? And to make things a little bit more interesting, we'll put our second trigger up here. And let's go ahead and make sure we set these triggers to the instance of the sound mix that we want. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull up the sound mix. So I'm going to take the default and I'm going to make sure this one is selected. I'm going to come over to details, open this up. There's the override under default. Paste that in there, hit save, and we'll do the same thing for over here. Again, I'm going to bring up this, we'll open this up, and we use the second one, this little test, close it, make sure that's selected, come back, and set that to map level. Alright, and that's all we need to do there. Make sure everything's saved. So we should be able to now test this out. So let's go ahead and do that. So fire it up. As you can see, here's the default that is set in the game preferences. We haven't done anything there. Here, the music's at a certain volume and the sound effects at a certain volume. So now I'm going to come into the trigger. And that's changed slightly. And yes, the sound effect is really quiet. Barely audible. So let's come up. Wow, that really is changey. Very changed. Yeah, very pitchy in the sound. And then we can come back here and reset it back to where we want it to be. And as you can see, and have some fun with this from within the side of the game. Alright, I will just stop this right here. Okay, so that now concludes part 3 of my tutorial on overriding sound mixes and sound classes from within your game. In the final part, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and create our audio settings screen that will allow our players to go and set up their audio preferences for both the sound, for both the music as well as the sound effects from within the game, and we'll tie that into the save system. So if you've made it this far to the end of my video, I thank you for it, and if you like what I'm doing, feel free to share my videos and give a like. As well as if you've got some suggestions, feel free to put some comments down below, as well as subscribe to my channel. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.